I think today we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the lawn. I want to explain kind of what we've done this year, where we've come from, where we've ended up. There's still a few problems with the lawn, but it's looking a lot better than it was at the beginning of the year. And who would have thunk it? We're getting a bit of an Indian summer after such an awful July, and most of August was very wet. Beginning of September now, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Anyway, first job, gonna give the lawn a quick cut, and then I'll explain what we've done, what problems we've got, and hopefully how we're gonna resolve them. Oh, it's warm. So just to explain a little bit of background first of all, because I have always had a bit of an obsession with lawns since I was about 10 years old. I don't know why. I used to cut the grass for my parents to get a bit of pocket money, and then I started doing it as a little kind of mini business. Again, I was only like 12 or something, but I was going around people's houses cutting their lawns, £5 a shot. And although I don't really know what I'm doing on the horticultural side of things, it has always been kind of a little bit of a hobby that, as I say, started off from a long time ago, to the point that I've had this lawn expert book. This was printed in 1982, I think it was. So I would have been 7 when this came out, but I remember just reading this cover to cover when I was younger. I thought it was just fascinating, all the different tools that you could get and all the different weeds and species of grass and all that. It was my hobby. Anyway, when we bought this house a couple of years ago, there was basically no lawn up this end of the garden. It was just kind of moss, and at the very bottom of the garden it was like overgrown grass, and really at the bottom end we've done nothing more than mow it, but this top end here we ended up, because of all the building work that we're doing, this just turned into a mud bath. So in the end, we just had to dig it all up and start again. So this is really our first full year of having a lawn at this top end. And although it looks all right at first glance, there are a few little problems. So I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a guided tour, and then I'm going to tell you what we've done this year to kind of rescue the lawn and bring it to the stage it's at now. And then we're also going to do a couple of other little bits and pieces. We've got some jobs to do down the bottom of the garden as well, which is quite exciting. So for this to make a bit more sense, you have to bear in mind that when we bought this property, there was a giant birch tree just there, and the roots sprawled out from that birch tree right across the lawn, and they were giant, mega giant roots. Me and Mrs. Mack spent a good couple of weeks, mostly Mrs. Mack, digging all the roots out of this. There was also snowberry roots as well, which if you've ever tried to dig up snowberry plants, you'll know that they're not particularly fun to remove from the ground. These are snowberries, by the way. Nature loves them. They're really good for bees, and wildlife eats the berries later on in the year. I don't mind them being part of a hedge, but they are quite invasive and they're not easy to remove from the ground, and you can't leave them in a lawn because they'll just kind of grow up through your lawn. So anyway, we dug it all up, levelled it, seeded it, and that was towards the back end of last year, and it all came through before winter last year, and it looked really, really good. But then in spring this year, it really didn't look very healthy at all. I was a little bit concerned because it looked like this whole area of lawn was about to completely die. I did apply some spring and summer lawn fertiliser. I think that was back in kind of April time. I can't remember. It's on my Instagram, Gosforth Handyman on Instagram, if you want to follow over on there. But that really made no difference whatsoever. I was quite disappointed. So what we tried as a last resort, we just top dressed it, and we put a few bags of compost down in this area, and honestly within a couple of days it fixed the whole lawn. It just came growing through, really lush green growth, and it just sorted it out straight away. So a few bags of compost early on in the year seemed to be the way to go on this particular lawn. And then later on in the year we've reapplied that fertiliser, and it did actually make quite a big difference. It's especially made a difference down this end of the lawn, but obviously this is a different type of soil here. Although this is relatively new as well, it's not as new as the lawn at the top end. But again, this is all spoil from when we dug the foundations for the studio room over here. So we raised this section of the garden up a bit. So this is basically virgin soil that's just been seeded, and yeah, it's full of weeds. I mean, it's not a perfect lawn by any stretch of the imagination, but for me, I'm more than happy with that. It looks great. But up the top end here, it's just been a bit of a different story. And then a couple of months ago, when we had all that rain in July, we started getting hit by red thread disease, which we talked about briefly in the last video. And what we've ended up doing is we put more fertiliser down, and that fixed the red thread disease. So yes, fertiliser does get rid of it, although it's still a little bit, when you look closely, it's not great. I mean, this is only a 1-year-old lawn, so there's pretty much no thatch in this. So this is just because it's not particularly healthy. We've still got a bit of remnants of the red thread disease, probably because of all the rain that we've had. So my plan is, we've still got some of this fertiliser left over, so I'm just going to apply that in this top section up here. And as I say, it's quite late in the season now anyway, early September, but the weather is amazing at the minute, so I might as well use up what's left in that bag, and hopefully that'll give it the strength to get through the winter. But I think the problem has been caused by that birch tree, and I think that giant birch tree and all the snowberries and everything else have just sucked every ounce of nutrition out of the soil in the top end of the garden here. I think the soil is effectively dead, even though we mixed in quite a bit of organic material when we sowed the lawn, but we probably didn't put enough in. And when we were tilling the soil, it was almost like dust, and I think that is what's causing the problems that we've got here. So hopefully, after a few more years of top dressing it, feeding it regularly, we can get this kind of back to being in a fairly healthy state. But what we're doing seems to be working. As I say, we'll chuck the rest of that bag of fertiliser down and we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, we've got a project down the bottom end that I want to show you, because we want to get a greenhouse built and a veg patch created ready for next year. And unfortunately, that means killing off a whole section of the lawn. The approach that we're going to take, and don't worry, it's not this bit, but the approach that we're going to take is kind of a bit of a natural lawn killing approach of just putting some sheeting down and leaving it for a few months, and then we'll prepare the soil after that for the greenhouse and the veg patch. So there we go. We'll just leave that to do its thing now, and hopefully the grass under that will die off. It's quite a big area, that. It doesn't look it, but that is enough space for a 12-foot greenhouse to come out from that back fence. Plenty room left and right. I mean, that should be plenty room for at least a 10-foot greenhouse. We're thinking maybe a 10 by 12, because we've got the space, we might as well make use of it. And then this area over to the left will be the start of our veg patch. We're just going to start relatively small, but we can always make it a little bit bigger, move in that direction a little bit. We are somewhat spoilt with this garden because we've got plenty space, and now that we've moved the sheds over from that side, we've got the room to put the greenhouse in. We've got one shed here, and we've put some seed down just around where the old building material used to be, and that's all just starting to come through now. So we're going to kind of just wild this off a little bit. As long as it's not just an expanse of mud, I'll be happy with that for now. But this should be a much easier solution than digging up, what, 150 square foot of turf. Other than that, as I say, the grass at this end of the garden, considering what it was like when we bought the house coming on for 3 years ago, and this was just basically wasteland down the bottom here, all we've done is mowed it. It's had one application of fertiliser, I think, and yeah, it's looking pretty good. Once we get something kind of growing around here, we've got the rhododendron there, and hopefully this will kind of fill out with meadow flowers and mixed in with grass and things. As I say, we're keeping it relatively wild down the bottom end here. It should look pretty good. This area here is going to become a new kind of chill out zone because this gets all of the evening sun. And again, the grass up here, see where it kind of comes up this little hill? That is all the leftover soil from the foundations of our extension. We just basically raised this area for the garden here, and yeah, that's become a nice little slopey, moundy thing. It gets kind of early afternoon, morning sun around here. I'm not entirely sure what time it is. I think it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon now. Anyway, let's head up the top here and we'll get this fertiliser put down. Oh, and by the way, no mucking about. Fertiliser spreaders, this is the one to get, unless you're like a professional greenskeeper or something, in which case you get like a more industrial version of that. There's a link to that in the description if I can find it, but yeah, that is probably the best kind of sub £100 fertiliser spreader that I have found. I ended up having enough fertiliser left over that I could do the whole lawn, so yeah, used that bag up and everything is now fed, and hopefully that'll keep it going over the winter time. In terms of jobs for next year, I mean, we desperately need all of these like borders to grow up, because obviously we've had to start again. We kept some of these big plants like the lilac and the rose spirea, and there's a dog rose behind there as well. But all of this is new and it needs to grow up, and then we can get rid of all this expansive soil. But a job for next year we could really do with some kind of brick border or something around the lawn, because at the minute mowing over this edge is a bit of a nightmare because the lawnmower just gets stuck all the time. So you need something for the wheels of the lawnmower to ride over on this kind of edge, and that needs doing all the way around the lawn. Obviously it's less of a problem once all the plants grow, because you'll not see this edge anymore. But until these bush out, and that'll take a few years, we could do with a border. And then, as I say, we've got the greenhouse project, which I'd like to get the greenhouse built this year so that we can get some seedlings in it early next year. And then hopefully we can get the veg patch going early next year as well. So yeah, plenty to keep us busy. So just to summarise everything we've done so far, I can probably even turn this into one of those short things. This is a garden that was completely neglected. It was overgrown, it was full of weeds, it was full of moss, and it just hadn't had any TLC for a long time. We replanted the lawn from scratch at the top end of the garden last year. It was looking really good last year, but at the beginning of this year it was looking a little bit sorry for itself. We tried putting some fertiliser down, that made no difference, so we top dressed it. The top dressing really helped. Just standard bags of compost. Unfortunately, because of all the rain we had in July, we ended up getting red thread disease in the lawn, so we fertilised it again, and that cured that problem. And we're into September now, and we've just done a final batch of fertiliser which will hopefully give it enough nutrition to keep things going through the winter and give it a healthy start for the beginning of next year. If you want to see the full story behind making the lawn at the top end, follow the Gosforth Handyman channel. There's a link down in the description below. And of course, subscribe on this channel and we'll keep you up to date with all of the goings on in this garden that we've had to rebuild from scratch. As per usual, folks, be nice to one another, look after each other, and we shall see you next time. Tatty bye.